Nothing could seem more English than the Feast of St. George on the 23rd of April. But of course, George, Roman soldier, is buried in Lydda, now Lod. The airport for Tel Aviv is just there. And of course, he is a Greek saint. So with me I have Dr. Andreas Andreopoulos from the University of Winchester. Tell us about St. George, not the patron of England, but the Greek saint.
Thank you, Tom. I always enjoy your theological meetings. There's relatively little that we know about St. George, but that actually tells us something about the cult of saints in the early church and still today. He is referred to in his Troparion, his Kontakion, as the defender of captives, or actually the liberator of captives. So in many ways, he is the model of the military saint. Now, military saint in early Christianity sounded a little bit like a contradiction in terms, because it was normally not allowed to Christians to become soldiers. However, many soldiers became Christians, so it was the other way around. And many of them were believed to have martyred for this reason, and George was one of them. So there is something about the ideological tradition. There is something that we could say about his Vita, when it was written, how it was rewritten, how it entered the calendar, and so on. But especially with St. George, there is much that we can say in terms of the devotion, the popular devotion in him, which is something that we find very strongly, not only in England, as you mentioned, but also in countries in the East. He is a very beloved saint in the East. And we can see him very often in icons killing the dragon, defending the people. He is the soldier on the side of God, not quite as St. Michael in the apocalyptic war, but nevertheless here on earth defending more common people. Nevertheless, we find several other saints who are similar to him, military saints like St. Theodore, St. Demetrius. Why this special? Why what special devotion to St. George? And here we have something that etymology can shed light on. His name, Georgios, refers to Georgia, agriculture. And if I hold this point in time and go back a few months, well, as you mentioned, of course, his cult is on the 23rd of April. In the Orthodox tradition, that very often falls within Lent. And when that's the case, his feast day is bumped to the Monday after Easter, so the second day of Easter, to make sure that it is given all the majesty that it deserves. So it is always taking place in the spring. In very similar ways, we have another military saint, St. Demetrius, whose feast is on the 26th of October, and whose name also refers to something agricultural, Dimitra, or Ceres, the Greek goddess Dimitra, or the Latin Ceres. Now, both these personalities tell something.
Georgos, of course, is tilling, and Demeter and Ceres is wheat.
Exactly.
Yes,
exactly. There is much that we can see in the cult of saints and in the Christological events as well, which remind us of a year lived sacramentally. And that's something else to say about not just St. George, but most saints, that very few years ago, 1 or 2 generations ago, people wouldn't necessarily remember this day or that day as a reference to what it is in the calendar year, but it was around St. George's Day, or it was around St. Demetrius' Day. My father is not absolutely sure when exactly he was born, because whenever we asked his mother, my grandmother, she would say, "Oh, one day or after St. Anne's."
Right.
But that's the way she used to define it. So that's one way to approach St. George. The name itself means much, the tilling, Georgios, Georgia, this working with the earth. He is a military saint, but he is also a very strong agricultural symbol. And as the defender, he is one of the most popular saints in the whole of the East.
And of course, in the West, we do have military saints like Saint Maurice, now a resort in Switzerland, and the Theban Legion, and St. Florian, and people like this. But they have they're saints that are on the periphery of memory. Whereas I sense, looking at the number of icons that one sees of George, that George is still very much a living memory within the Orthodox Church.
Very much so. And I think something else that is fascinating, both from an Eastern and Western perspective of St. George, is that we cannot really trace a process or decision for his canonization. It shows a process of popular cult, which is how we all started, not with a synodal or a papal decision, but because of the cult of the people. It is something that emerged naturally, and it is, sometimes we use the expression, it's the mind or the heart of the church that made this a feast. And it's still very much a feast that lives on. It's a very relevant feast and saint.
Andreas, thanks for coming and telling us about the cult of St. George in the Orthodox churches. Well, if you're celebrating St. George as the patron saint of England, I hope you have a great festival. But please remember that St. George is an important feast day for many other churches, particularly the Orthodox churches in the East.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's always a joy to be here.
Thank you.